Hey, what's going on, everybody? Justin here, and it's been a while since I had a video where I just slung some books around, so that's what we're going to be doing today. We're heading in towards the tail end here of Nonfiction November, so I hope everyone's nonfiction reading's been going well. But it's also quarter 4 of Historathon. For those who don't know what that is, it's a reading event that was created last year, and it's a year-long reading event hosted by Revenant Reads. He's got a whole bunch of lovely co-hosts as well. I'll leave all their links down below. And quarter 4, which is October, November, December, is all about reading modern history, and for the purpose of Historathon, that's 1820 to the modern day. So that's pretty much everything I own on those years. This is probably one of my weaker areas of history, actually, but let's just get right into it, because I think there's 20 or 21 books, and we're going to be here all day if I don't stop running my mouth at some point. So we're going to start with the bricks, the longest ones that fit this category. First one here is The Pursuit of Power, Europe 1815 to 1914 by Richard J. Evans. This is part of, I think, the Penguin History of Europe series, if I remember. Penguin History of Europe, if I remember correctly. And this was my first real foray since college, dealing with the long 19th century, and it's something I wanted to read about. And this was great, amazing. I thought, it was, first of all, it's 800 something pages, I think. I read this for March of the Mammoths way back in March, and I thought it was pretty fantastic considering it's not something I read about normally, and it kept me interested for this long. I have another one coming up. Doesn't quite fit. I don't know if I could quite give it the same recommendation. I think the pacing was fast, but you don't go into the weeds so much that you kind of lose the big picture. Like I said, it's kind of dealing with the long 19th century, kind of everything that's changing during those time periods up till World War I. You got kind of the coalescing of Italy and Germany, for example. During those time periods, you have a bunch of revolutions happening in the middle, which, like I said, is coming up in just a little bit. But if you want to learn about, the 1800s, this is a fantastic start. What I loved about it, too, was it wasn't just a political military narrative. Obviously, there's a lot of sections kind of dealing with that, but it was interspersed with a lot of kind of more cultural and other stuff as well, which I found really, really cool. So next up is one that was sent to me by Princeton University Press. I think I want to say last year, but I got around to it this year, and it's The Soviet Century, Archaeology of a Lost World by Karl Schlegel. I think this is translated out of the German. This was totally out of my wheelhouse. I don't read hardly anything on Russian history per se, and I think this one's over 900 pages. No, I think actually, if you count the index and everything, but I think it's about 800 some pages of text. But what I found fascinating about this is it's a collection. I can't remember if it's around 180, something like that. Almost let's see, 59. Nope. I guess if you count those last 62. Almost mini. Oh, I guess they're not really that many. They would be averaging around 10 to 15 pages or whatever. But anyways, a bunch of different essays on a whole bunch of different topics on Soviet culture. For example, you learn about the Moscow Kitchen, which if you read anything about kind of intellectual history, is kind of almost a quasi underground intellectual life for scientists and thinkers and stuff in the communist era, and kind of how they got their ideas spread and everything. But you learn about black markets, waiting in lines, how that actually worked, how kind of inefficient and kind of just terrible a lot of the systems were dealing with things. But you learn a lot about the gulags. You learn a lot about the infrastructure. You learn about rural life. You learn about, I don't know, I can't remember, it was shopping bags, for example, was and why that's a big thing. I just found it super interesting, a lot of things I had never ever even considered even thinking about. But yeah, just a really cool. It's a very good social history. You learn about not really just the very little well, I shouldn't say very little, but you learn about the elites, but the majority of it is focused on what are the regular people, living in Moscow, living out in the suburbs, living out in the countryside. What are they all what do they do? How does their life actually look like? Why does it suck? Where is it better in some cases than others in the USSR? So I found that really fascinating. It is a lot, but you can almost read it in almost little sections. Like I said, it's 60 different kind of essays on different topics. So it's not really chronological per se. But next up, we got Revolutionary Spring, 1848 to 1849, Europe Aflame and the Fight for a New World by Christopher Clark. This is one I've done as a buddy read recently, and I'm not gonna lie, this was super dense. The writing is actually really good. Like, don't let it fool you. It looks a lot smaller than those two, but I think it's like 750 like pages of actual text, somewhere like along those lines. But super dense. Every page is just jam-packed. You learn about all the different revolutions and uprisings, all kinds of different countries, obviously with big emphases on France, for example, and Germany. But during these 2 years, like, I can't remember how many countries, it was like 20 or something different, like European countries had some kind of revolt or uprising or something or other during this time period. And it was kind of like interesting seeing kind of the comparing, contrasting kind of what was going on, because there wasn't really a huge unifying theme behind a lot of them. It was kind of, there was some like emulation obviously, but a lot of them were kind of like standalone, I guess, and almost just kind of got like kind of the confidence to do it, I think, based on like prior things. But a lot of the events themselves were not like there wasn't like kind of like a grand kind of like like overarching, I guess, purpose behind it per se, like connecting them all together. That probably didn't make like a whole lot of sense. But anyways, what I really did like about the book is Christopher Clark uses a lot of really good primary sources and source material from, you know, obviously during like the 1800s to kind of like convey his points and everything. Like I said, I think it's just a lot. Like, it'd probably be really great if you're studying this, or if you're just really in love with, like, you know, the 1800s and that kind of thing. But you just get bombarded with so much stuff. Like, it just starts to kind of like all, like, I felt it kind of was like all bleeding together. And I think we kind of had like that general impression in the group chat that the writing was really good. It was just almost too much of a good thing, if that makes any sense. So those were the longest ones for sure. Now we're going on some like military history. We'll start with, let's see, we got two Civil War ones, and then I think a couple World War I ones. World War I is actually one of the only topics I ever used to really read. As far as like modern-ish history. But first up we have this year's The Demon of Unrest by Erik Larson, a saga of hubris, heartbreak, and heroism at the dawn of the Civil War. I think I did a book review of this one. I'll leave it up there. I'm gonna laugh if I actually didn't do a book review of it. I think I did. But anyways, I was sent this by, is it Crown? Yep, Crown Publishing. So thank you to them for this one as well. Erik Larson is just a fantastic history writer. You might know him from Dead Wake, the city of Beasts, or City of Good and Evil, something like that. He's written a bunch of really popular history books. I've only read this one and one other, but I probably will get onto some of the other ones. I think Splendid and the Vile is the subtitle of the other one that I was like thinking of. But anyways, this is all about the bombing and artillery shelling of Fort Sumter that opens the Civil War. But that's actually only like the last like quarter or 20% or so of the book. The vast majority of the book is dealing with kind of the lead up to that, and kind of what's going on in South Carolina, what's going on with Lincoln, what's going on with like a bunch of the other figures kind of involved with these things. I just found it really fascinating. Lots of really good use of source material as well. Anyone who's like interested in the Civil War should definitely read it as well. Next up, we got Hymns of the Republic by S.C. Gwynne, the story of the final year of the American Civil War. Not gonna lie, I don't remember too much about it. I think I read this like when it first came out, like 6 years ago, something like that. I do remember enjoying it just because I actually don't really like reading too much on Civil War history. I know there's a lot of Civil War buffs and that kind of thing. I do remember enjoying it. I think my one critique of the book was it kind of glossed over Sherman's March to the Sea, if I remember correctly. But S.C. Gwynne is pretty well regarded for his history writing as well. And then now let's move on to World War I, where I feel a little bit more confident what I'm talking about. This is probably the best one-volume book on World War I. I think lots of other like booktubers and people have praised it as well. This is The World Undone, a story of the Great War of 1914 to 18 by G.J. Meyer. He's also written one that's kind of using like the United States as kind of like the lens to look through the conflict as well. But this one, I guess, I think it looks like it's about 700 pages of text. But I remember when I first read this, when I first started BookTube, and this was definitely, out of all, I probably read about maybe 20-ish World War I books now. This is definitely the best, like, just overview of the conflict. You get a little bit of everything. He does admit, like, at the end, you know, he had a kind of gloss over a few things here and there. Most notably, like the African front, which I guess I'll just talk about right here, because this is the most recent one I read in this category. I think it was last month. We got World War I, the African Front, an Imperial War on the African Continent by Edward Pace. This is all about all the skirmishes and battles that took place in the continent of Africa during World War I between the British and the Germans. And it was definitely, when you read a lot of World War I history, it's kind of, not, maybe jarring isn't the right word, but it's just so, it contrasts so starkly with, like, you know, the major battles of World War I, like in the Middle East and on the Western Front and on the Eastern Front in Russia. Major battles in Africa were like maybe in a few thousands of men on each side, which is just super like bizarre, like I said, compared to like the Battle of the Frontiers even before like trench warfare started. But in some battles too, it's like literally after the battle there might be like a couple dozen casualties like on each side, and that was considered like, you know, a big event for like kind of that area, which is, like I said, just very odd. But learned a ton, and it was kind of I don't know, just the book does a good job kind of highlighting how like ridiculous things were getting, in the sense of like how the stakes were kind of ramping up, but in the big scheme of things, you know, both, like, pretty much all the powers that be were just like, Africa, like, you know, what are we gonna like do with it? We'll give them like the scraps, like, because we just can't like afford to like send Africa like anything, you know, what the forces we have down there. They just had to kind of like start making do with like what they had, and it kind of turned into like a lot of guerrilla kind of style like warfare with a lot of like, you know, maneuvers and stuff like that. So I found that really interesting. And then probably one of my favorite ones on kind of a niche thing for World War I, we have The Wolf, the mystery raider that terrorized the seas during World War I by Richard Guillotte and Peter Hannen. So what this was, or what this is a story, the true story of The Wolf, which was a German, I'm not sure exactly what it was, like cruise raider or something like that, which I think, I want to say, like, if you counted all the miles it did, it was like a stealth warship that was almost like for like terror tactics. It never went into port like after it had left Germany, and never used any outgoing like radio communication. So in the era of World War I, it was effectively silent, and it basically was like a ghost ship that would just like show up at like different ports and like, you know, take captives, blow up other ships and everything, lay some mines, and then just disappear. Actually, I'm just going to read the back because I can't remember exactly how many miles and stuff, but it's pretty crazy. On November 30, 1916, an apparently ordinary freighter left harbor in Kiel, Germany, destined not to touch land again for 15 months. In this gripping account of the audacious and lethal World War I expedition, Richard Guillotte and Peter Hannen detailed the 64,000-mile voyage of the Wolf, a German naval raider sent on a suicide mission to terrorize distant Allied ports by laying minefields and sinking freighters. To maintain secrecy, the Wolf could never pull into port or use her radio, and to comply with the rules of sea warfare, her captain fastidiously tried to avoid killing civilians aboard the merchant ships he attacked. The Wolf thus became a huge floating prison with more than 400 captives, including women and children from 25 different nations. Forced to survive on food and fuel plundered from other ships, facing death from scurvy, and hunted by the combined navies of 5 allied nations, the Germans and the prisoners came to share a common bond. The will to survive transcended enmities of race, class, and nationality. The story of this epic voyage is a vivid, real-life narrative and simultaneously a richly detailed picture of a world being profoundly transformed by war. So I remember reading this, and it was just, like I said, it says exactly what it says on the tin, you know, 64,000 miles without ever really, like, laying up anywhere to, like, refuel and recover, just to remain secret. Like I said, just, you know, being a ghost ship, kind of going here and there, without trying to, you know, make it so that you couldn't be captured and everything. But also, I do remember, like, yeah, the captain effectively, like, you know, treating everyone super well that were captured, trying to keep everyone alive and everything, because he was, like, in that kind of, like, old school style of, you know, like, the chivalrous admiral and all that kind of thing. So, found that really interesting as far as that goes. And probably, like, if you wanted to read not, like, an overview, but just, like, a one shot of, like, some, like, kind of aspect of World War I, I think that'd be a good one to go with. So next up, I got a couple like random ones. I'm not even sure how to like categorize So we've got Barons of the Sea and Their Race to Build the World's Fastest Clipper Ship by Stephen Ujifusa. I really enjoyed this one. This is all about clipper ships during the 1800s, and it's like a very American style ship, and effectively what they would do is a bunch of different like kind of shipping barons and whatnot would compete with each other to build bigger, faster clipper ships, so that they could kind of like outcompete their competitors, especially for trade with China between over the Pacific Ocean and that kind of thing. Just found it really, really cool. I don't know much about like too much naval stuff, especially in like the modern period. So I think it was just kind of fun. And look, I just think that cover is just really awesome, like the way they did it. Okay, next up is a recent-ish one. This is like I'm bending the rules a little bit with like some of these kind of more science-y ones, but this one is When the Ice is Gone by Paul Bierman. What a Greenland ice core reveals about Earth's tumultuous history and perilous future. Okay, so a lot of it is about like ice cores and like what we learn from them as far as like climate change and that kind of thing. But there is a huge section in the middle of the book. I'd say it's probably 30 to 40%, at least. Is all about kind of like the history of like America, the United States is like polar operations in Greenland. We had a bunch of like secret bases and kind of not so secret bases, like base Thule and stuff, literally carved into like the ice sheets and stuff in Greenland. And it was just kind of really interesting learning how that actually functioned. What did that actually mean for the people stationed there? How did that like work? And you know, the darkness and, you know, just the constant like low temperatures and stuff really did affect people quite substantially for the most part. But it was kind of interesting just reading about the ingenuity, the different scientists and like military personnel that had to like deal with, you know, like I said, living in an ice sheet in Greenland, you know, quasi permanently. Next up is another one. So this one's very Americana. We got The Great River by Boyce Upholm, The Making and Unmaking of the Mississippi. And this is basically, like it says on the tin, an entire history of the Mississippi River system. And a lot of this is dealing actually with, you know, in the 1800s, early 1900s, when they're damming the river, trying to, you know, the different kind of magnates and like cargo carriers and stuff that are trying to control it, what they're kind of doing with it, who has like, you know, like I said, like kind of control of like different sections of the river and things like that. Also, there was kind of some interesting, neat like tidbits between like, you know, when engineering was becoming like a professional, I guess, trade and industry, as opposed to the Army Corps of Engineers, which was like primarily the only like engineers in the United States for a long time. And the Mississippi River was kind of like the battleground for like kind of proving like civil engineers like have like a place in society and that kind of thing. So I found that really interesting. And if you live anywhere near like the Mississippi River system, I think you'll probably enjoy that one as well. And then this one is, like I said, it is a history book, but you're kind of dealing with like food and stuff as well. But The Secret History of Food, Strange but True Stories About the Origin of Everything We Eat by Matt Siegel. I think I did a review of this one as well. Can't remember off the top of my head. This is just a ton of like comedic, just not retelling, just a comedic like approach of looking at like how ridiculous like our food system has gotten. But you deal with lots of really crazy historical characters. It's like a Graham, like from like Graham Cracker fame, and like how crazy he was, and Kellogg from like Kellogg cereals and how crazy he was and everything like that. So pretty much every food thing that you learn about, there is like a lot of background on like the history of like kind of its development and who were like the main players and companies kind of like dealing with it, and why it generally is like a bad thing at this point in time that's like come down to us. So like I said, it's kind of like it's like, you know, it is a history of, it is a little bit of a misnomer saying like of all the food we eat. It's mostly like, I think there's like 8 chapters on like a couple different ones, but the anecdotes and the primary source material that he uses is just hilarious, and I thoroughly recommend it if you like comedic nonfiction. And then the last up for the last pile here, I'm gonna cheat and do like kind of biography and memoirs. I guess it's still history, but a lot of them are kind of science. Well, a few of them are sciencey and everything. So we're gonna start with A Life on Our Planet, A My Witness Statement and a Vision for the Future by David Attenborough. And everyone knows who he is. I'm gonna be like, it's just sad that, you know, when he dies, it's gonna be like when, you know, everyone like freaked out, you know, when the Queen died. But I think it's gonna be even worse when David Attenborough goes. I think he's like 98 now. But anyways, his witness statement. So a lot of it is dealing with climate change, how the world has changed since he was born in the early 1900s to the current day and age. But there's a lot of memoirs and vignettes from his like time, kind of being like just like a regular, working in like radio and TV and that kind of thing, to how he became like a host of like a couple different shows way back in like the 60s and stuff. And then kind of like through like some of his like expeditions and travels. But very easy read, very thought-provoking and reflective though, and kind of like sad at the same time. So definitely check that one out. Like I said, history biography, yeah, we're gonna like go with it. Next up, we got Origin Story: The Trials of Charles Darwin by Howard Markel. And this is kind of like a history of the publication of the origin of species, kind of like what it took Darwin to like write it. Kind of infamously took kind of dilly-dallied and wanted to, you know, kind of make it as perfect as possible, until Alfred, you know, Russel Wallace was like, hey, I got like this idea, and it's basically the same thing as like his like natural selection and everything like that. So you know, they kind of like jointly publish it. But it was kind of interesting reading about like how good like his friends were, because at the time he kind of rushed to publish it, and you know, one of his children had like recently just died, so he wasn't there for the publication of like the paper or anything like that. But just shows like his like good friends like actually doing like what they could and like stepped in for him, and then kind of like pushed Wallace to the, maybe not pushed to him side, it's probably not like the right way to put it, but made sure like Darwin kind of really got the credit for like all this stuff. But it was very interesting just kind of reading about how the publication process actually worked, him working with his publisher, as well as kind of like some of the infamous debates afterwards. Like I said, we're kind of, if you've read any of that kind of stuff, you know how kind of redonkulous like a few of those ones kind of got, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. Next up is we got a few 20th century things in here. We got Good Blood, A Doctor, a Donor, and the Incredible Breakthrough That Saved Millions of Babies by Julian Guthrie. And this is a history of basically how we came to what's the word I'm looking for? It's not a vaccination. A treatment. I think there's a technical word there, but how we developed the treatment for rhesus disease, which is a disease that happens basically when a pregnant mother, when the fetus and the mother, their like blood types, there's something wrong. Maybe not something wrong per se, but basically there's like some kind of globin factor. I can't remember all the details. Aren't important. Well, I guess they are important, especially if you're like dealing with it. But basically the mother's body kind of like attacks the fetus like through the blood and stuff like that. But what's interesting is you might have heard a story about an Australian man who had, you know, like golden blood effectively. He donated blood, I can't remember, it was like 25,000 times or whatever, because he had some factors in his blood where they could make basically a cure for rhesus disease from that. And it's kind of a history of him, kind of his like little memoirs and stuff, dealing with, you know, going through that process and everything, kind of like how his like life went as he's like, you know, donating blood like, you know, week after week for like years and years and years, as well as the scientists who like used it to kind of develop the cure. Maybe was cure really the word I was thinking of there? I think it probably was. Anyways, kind of like what they went through to like kind of develop the cure for rhesus and stuff like that. So it's not real. There's like screenings for it nowadays, and it only takes, I think, like one shot of the treatment to basically prevent anything like serious from happening if it all goes well. So I found this one really different. A lot of people really enjoy kind of like medical history, so I think this one might be a good one to try if that's your thing. Next up, we have American Woman, The Transformation of the Modern First Lady, from Hillary Clinton to Jill Biden by Katie Rogers. And this is a history of the modern First Lady, which I literally knew almost like nothing about, basically, you know, from the 90s to the current time period. So it was definitely interesting seeing their points of view, because effectively there's almost like no rules. There's not like every single like new First Lady basically just has to kind of like make up the role for herself. It was just very interesting seeing how each one, like I said, starting with Hillary in the 90s, and then going through the 90s, and then going through the 2000s, and then going through the 2010s, and then going through the 2020s, and then going through the 2030s, and then going through the 2040s, and then going through the 2050s, and then going through the 2060s, and then going through the 2070s, and then going through the 2080s, and then going through the 2090s, 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 and then going through the like kind of took what they got and kind of like ran with it, or didn't run with it so much, as you'll find in a couple of different scenarios. So I found it really interesting, just because you always read about presidents and stuff, but you don't always read about the first ladies. Next up, we have Unbowed, a memoir by Wangari Maathai. And Wangari Maathai was super famous. She started the Greenbelt movement in Kenya, which was both a kind of conservation greening movement, as well as a women's rights movement, where effectively local women would be planting trees to like kind of regenerate and regrow different forests in Kenya. But this is an autobiography of sorts, dealing with both all the way from her childhood, growing up, and I can't remember, it was a Christian school of some kind, but also being able to do almost a foreign exchange thing in the United States for a little while, but then also kind of all the travails and obstacles she kind of encountered, being a woman in Kenya, with all the corruption and everything like that, trying to get like her PhD and things like that. I just found it really fascinating, and I encourage everyone to read it. Just like I said, super fascinating story of like grit and determination, kind of dealing with like kind of when you have like all the cards like stacked against you and still trying to do the best you can with what you have. All right. Next up, we got another biography. I say another biography. I already said these are all biographies. We got Planet Walker, 17 Years of Silence, 22 Years of Walking by John Francis. This was super fascinating. So after the Bay incident, San Francisco Bay oil spill, effectively the author here, John Francis, decided to basically make a vow of, I'm just gonna like walk to places from now on. I'm not gonna use oil and gasoline and all that kind of stuff. And then it eventually also turned into like kind of a vow of silence on top of that. And it's a biography kind of just dealing with all the stuff he did during those years, like walking around the country, kind of telling his story, but never with words. And you'll kind of like learn how he does that, why he was doing that, and everything like that. Just super powerful. Like, anyone that has the capability of actually following through with that. And I think if I remember correctly, during those 17 years, I think he only spoke once to his mother at like one time, like during those like 17 years. So I found that, like I said, just really, really interesting. Like, just anyone that can actually pull that off and do that, like I said, just has a powerful story to tell. He also has another one I need to get to called The Ragged Edge of Silence, but I haven't read that one yet. And then lastly, we got 3 biographies on Theodore Roosevelt. So there is a trilogy here by Edmund Morris. We got The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt, which I read, which is dealing with his life all the way up from his birth to the initial presidency there. Then we got Theodore Rex, which is dealing with his years, both terms as president. And then I also have Colonel Roosevelt, which is all about after the presidency. And then I'm going to throw this one in here because I like this one a lot. And this one's The Naturalist, Theodore Roosevelt, A Lifetime of Exploration and the Triumph of American National History. Natural history by Darren Lund. And this is a biography of Theodore Roosevelt, but with the lens of focusing on his love for nature and animals and conservation, establishing different state and national parks and all that kind of stuff. You really can't go wrong reading about Theodore Roosevelt. Obviously, these ones I think are probably better if you want like the full picture and that kind of thing. But I really enjoy this one as well, just dealing with kind of the conservation aspect, which he was a pretty big part of during like that initial kind of Gilded Age idea of conservation and everything during the early 1900s. But there you have it. I feel like this video was super long, but I think there's about 20-ish books dealing with the years 1820 to the modern time period. Let me know if you read any of these, what you think of any of them, or if you got any good books on the 19th and 20th centuries. Definitely need to kind of read a little bit more on that. I feel like I filled in some gaps this year, but still got quite a few to go. But let me know what your favorite is down below, and I will see you in the next video. And always remember, whether you're reading books on the 20th century or the 19th century or not, read victoriously.